Welcome to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast for authentic daters. I'm your host, Dave in Denver. Each week, we invite expert guests to come share their knowledge, tools, and tips to help you show up as your most authentic self. Hi guys, welcome back to this week's episode of the BBR podcast. I am so ecstatic to introduce my special guest, Mr. Armon Anderson. How are you today?
I'm amazing. When you live in California, if you have any complaints, man, something's going wrong.
I hear you. I was just recently in San Diego. I was telling you before we hit record that I fell in love with that town the moment I stepped off the plane.
Yeah, you can't beat 70 degrees year round.
That's right. Every chance I get to come to California, I'm going to say yes. And as it turns out, about 5 of our podcast guests have come from California. So it's kind of drawing me towards a live event, maybe later in 2019. How's that sound?
Hey, I'll be there.
Okay, that's great. I know a little bit about you, but what I'd love to talk to my guest or introduce you as to our listeners is really how and why you got started in the journey that you're on.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people look at. It's such an interesting question. I used to do the same thing where you look at where someone is today, but you really don't look to see where they started and what brought them to where they are today. And so in my own life, I'm always fascinated to find out what was that defining moment in someone's life that got them, because it's no accident that they're there now, but what happened before. And so I grew up an entrepreneur. My father had left my family when I was 12, and he was an alcoholic. And I started to see him at night, like passed out on the tile floor, and he was kind of a heavy guy. And so I used to pick him up, put him in bed. And I got to the point where I didn't know what was going on with him, because when you're 12 years old, it's kind of hard to just, fathom what's going on. And one day he was just gone. I was 12, and I remember woke up, he didn't come home that night, didn't come home the next night. And on the third night, I had gone to my closet, and he had left a case of beer in my closet, and probably thinking it was the kitchen, right? When he was drunk one night. And I opened it, and I picked it up, and I went to take a sip, almost like to rebel against, my mom, my dad, and all this anger that I had. I thought it was my fault, these kind of things. And as soon as I was about to take that sip, I had this vision, and I saw myself at 32 with 2 kids of mine looking up at me. And in that moment, it was, are you going to choose betterness and break the cycle, or are you going to choose bitterness and duplicate that, what he did? And at 12 years old, which, whether you believe in spirituality, God, Jesus, whoever, something hit me that I chose betterness. And I've never drank in my life to this day. I'm 28. And it wasn't any religious reason. It was for the sake that, as crazy as it sounds, at 12, I knew I had to break that cycle if I wanted a better life for not only myself, but my future family years and years later, decades later. So that was kind of the first, big moment in my life. And then fast forward to 24, I had dated a girl who was physically abusive. And I've never been around abuse, even verbal abuse. And so when I allowed her to start hitting me, to make the long story short, after a year, it got to a point where she had hit me so hard, I looked at my arm that night in her Prius, and my arm was bleeding. And it was like a Lifetime movie. It was like so fast, but everything slowed down, like in slow motion. And I looked at myself for the first time. It sounds kind of weird because you live with yourself and you see yourself in the mirror every day, and you've been with yourself, and you're the only person who's never left yourself in this life, right? Friends have left, family maybe, relationship, wife, girlfriend, but you've never left yourself. And so I looked at my arm, and for the first time I said, you know what? This is not about her. I said, you chose her out of any woman in the world. And not only did you choose her, you allowed her to do this for 12 months to get to this point where you have completely broke and your arm's bleeding. Is this really about her, or is it about Me. And so that night I went home and I never talked to her again, never saw her again. And I had a dream that night, kind of like the vision I had when I was 12. And in my dream, this guy says, Armon, you are now Mr. Self-Love. And this is your purpose. Sharing the message that self-love is the cure to self-hate. It's the beginning of your self-healing. And it is the end of your self-destruction. And I wake up in cold sweats, my brother, and I was freaking out. I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm broken myself. I don't even know what self-love is, because all we're taught is how to date effectively to attract the one. That's it, right? How to love somebody else, but you're never taught how to love yourself or what that even means. I mean, I didn't even know what self-love was. And so I Google self-love, and of course on Google, the second definition says you're a narcissist if you love yourself. And so I have these second thoughts of, okay, that doesn't really make sense, but let me dive deeper into this. And we talked about this earlier before we started this podcast, that what I found is that when we don't look within, we will attract scarcity, insecurity, drama, toxicity. But the moment we decide to look within and grow the inside and love the inside and release the insecurities and jealousies and wearing a mask, trying to be somebody you're not to attract someone that probably you don't even like anyways, only then can we move forward and be happy. And this society, especially with social media, you know, I was reading Haley Baldwin, or should I say Haley Bieber. She is so much happier when she's off social media. And it's because there's such hateful comments nowadays, but there's so much comparison. And it's never a bad thing to see somebody else and admire, you know, what they've been able to create, or admire their style, and want to go and look at where you can, you know, maybe switch up your style because that's what you enjoy for yourself. But it's a different ball game when you're comparing yourself to someone and all you're telling yourself is who you're not and what you can achieve. And we don't give enough credit of what toxic thoughts can do to our health and our livelihood.
Yeah, it's a true manifestation of our mental health affecting our physical health. There's a fantastic book out there called The Body Keeps the Score. And that thought process of like just reliving trauma, and not breaking the cycle can actually manifest in disease, or disease, I think is a great way to pronounce that word. And speaking of that, you were so young at 12 years old, and then again at 24 years old, to actually consciously break that cycle. How do you do that so young when people go through their entire lives not ever accomplishing that at all?
You know, one of the things I always tell people is bitterness is more difficult than choosing bitterness, right? Bitterness is, you know, somebody said something hurtful to me, so I'm going to say the same thing and retaliate, right? It's someone cheated on me, so I'm going to do whatever I can to make them look bad, throw them under the bus, tell their family, right? Just blast them on social media, right? That's coming from a place of bitterness, right? But bitterness is realizing that my father, who's an incredible human being, right? And my mom still has yet to come to this thought in her own self, right? And we can't fix or save anybody. So I let it go. It's her life and, you know, her journey to figure it out. But my father is an incredible man. He never did anything to hurt us physically, verbally, not once, right? But because he didn't love himself, he literally, and it's impossible to love somebody else unless you love yourself. And he had his own insecurities of not being able to provide maybe financially the way he saw people in my mom's family provide. And all these things he let get to him instead of working within, he just couldn't handle, right? So at 12, obviously you're angry and your father's not there and you're growing up as a 12-year-old boy, going through puberty and all these things. And, you're raised by now two women, a sister and a mom. But what's crazy is 8 years go by and I see my mom angry, my sister angry. There's bitterness. If I talk to my dad, my mom says, "What are you doing? How dare you?" You're basically saying it's okay that he left and all these things, right? That it's just so toxic. And I remember at 20 years of age, I had my breakthrough within myself, because forgiveness is for you. As much as we think we hold on to this hate and anger, that forgiveness is for somebody else, right? It's for yourself, because you know this better than anybody with all the amazing things that you do, with fitness and mind and body, is that we go to bed at night at the end of the day with the thoughts that we tell ourselves. So if you're jealous about somebody else, it's not doing them anything. You're going to bed with that jealousy, right? And so I called my dad. I'm 20 years old. And I said, "Hey, we haven't spoken in about a year. I want to take you to lunch." And he said, Why? And I said, "I just want to pick you up, take you to lunch." And I get to lunch and I said, "Dad, I want to thank you." And he started getting emotional. He's like, "For what?" And I said, "If it wasn't for the things that you did in your life, I wouldn't be the man that I am today. I wouldn't be Mr. Self-Love today. I wouldn't know what self-love is today. I wouldn't have known that I was codependent in my first relationship, try to save somebody from drinking. And I thought it was her problem. And I realized it was my problem, not hers. All these things I wouldn't have learned if it wasn't for you having the actions that you did. So I thank you." And I released that, 8 years of bitterness, anger, all this stuff, from first forgiving myself and then forgiving him, in that order.
So you thanked him for all the actions and all the choices. So is your perspective that occurrence at 12 years old happened for you and not to you?
Yeah, it's so twisted, but once you understand that pain is growth in life, and you said two key words, for you, right? Everything in life happens for you. Some things take longer to understand than others, right? And it's okay. It doesn't mean because at one point when I'm getting, physically abused, that I'm supposed to understand it in that moment, because obviously I didn't for 12 months.
Yeah, probably not.
I'm telling you, brother, everybody told me, "What are you doing? If you hang out with her again, same thing's going to happen. You're driving to LA to see her, and then 2 minutes later, she's hitting you, and you're driving back home, and it's in the 405, a lot of traffic.
Uh-huh.
What are you doing? You're getting panic attacks, and you're ending up in the hospital," right? So I went through all this stuff. Like, I went to the hospital for panic attacks. I never even knew what a panic attack was in my life. Now they're offering me, all this prescription stuff, and I was so against it. I'm like, no, I need to figure out myself, because something is happening within me that I'm not facing as to why I'm attracting this whole situation over and over again. And I got to break this pattern. And that's when I really started to look within. And man, it's tough. It's so crazy how we are the last people that we ever want to look within, when we want to just say, "Oh, did you hear about so-and-so got married to so-and-so, or they're doing this and that?" And our focus becomes on everything and everybody outside of ourselves. And that's why when I ask people, I say, I want to know who you are. So who are you? And most people just sit there and they're like, "I don't know." And I sit there and I'm like, wow. So you're telling me you're going through your life not knowing who you are, your purpose. And I know you've heard the saying, right? The two most important days in your life: the day you're born, the day you find out why. And a lot of people are missing that purpose.
I went through my life without purpose for a really long time. And I have a 16-year-old daughter. And until I realized that she was a big part of my purpose, I never had that belief that I'd be able to go back to school and finish at 28 years old, eventually graduating at 31, and then beginning a personal training career 9 months after school ends. And then 6 years later, here we are with a studio and 3 trainers and online programs that go everywhere. That purpose really is what gets me out of bed every single morning, is to share the message that fitness and nutrition can combat depression and anxiety. And that's a big goal. That's a big purpose. I'll never actually be able to check that one off my list. But I wanted to follow up and ask you, you saw the definition of self-love as being narcissistic, and yet you still pursued this journey as Mr. Self-Love.
You know what goes to is that no matter what you do in life, there's going to be people that don't agree with what you're doing and who you are. And you can be Mother Teresa. You could be Martin Luther King and just be a game changer, right? Who people still talk about, these people decades, centuries later. And still, they had so much hate. And if you look at it, it's because people have self-hate. It's a lot easier to hate somebody who's doing what you really want to do, and you're at home, and because you're not willing to be consistent and take that leap of faith, you just want to hate on that person who's doing what you desire to do. You understand?
Yeah, you're projecting your self-hate onto them.
Yeah, like I shot this video the other day, and it was about, starting with one step forward. And although you have sometimes 2 steps back, it's setting you up for a bigger comeback, because these moments of pain really identify how strong your purpose and your reason why is in your life. And so I have this great video. It's like 60 seconds on Instagram. And this girl writes, it could be a guy, I don't know who it was, but this person writes, the one thing that you need to change is not worrying about your first step forward. It's about your receding hairline. Armon, you need surgery because your hairline is receding. And I started laughing because I love me, right? And when you love yourself, it doesn't matter what anybody says, especially when you're doing good in the universe. That stuff doesn't affect you, right? It's not the best thing that you want to read, but it doesn't get to you because you know it's not about you. But I'm just sitting there after my own personal growth and this whole journey in my life, and I'm like, what has to be going on in somebody's mind to take that message and talk about change as having a surgery for my receding hairline or something like that, right? And it just goes to show, right, that self-love can cure self-hate. But as long as you're going to sit with that self-hate and think that that's going to serve you, right? Because what is she going to get out of that comment, right? A 2-second rise that maybe I'm going to read it, I'm going to have a reaction, I'm going to engage in it, right? And it happens typically on every post now, right? But it goes to show that when you're consistent and you're doing something even positive, that stuff's going to happen. So you got to know why you're doing what you're doing.
That's right. That's definitely true. And I see that occur occasionally. I saw one on YouTube the other day. I don't check comments on YouTube very often because a lot of it's spam and automation and things like that. But I decided to not spend any time on that negativity so that it couldn't come in and distract me from that lifetime goal or that purpose. So I'll continue to take that one step forward. And I've had a lot of 2 steps back based on my own decision making, based on just dumb luck, and also just not being prepared for what I was being faced with at the time, because the vision is a whole lot bigger than I was actually capable of when I first started realizing what I was meant to do. Well, when you first discover your why, then the how becomes very easy.
Yeah.
And pushing away or just ignoring that negativity is a really easy step for me to get to that big why. And I do want to cover something because we touched on it a little bit, that self-love is self-centered, but there's 2 sides of that spectrum there. self-love versus self-centered. I think I've heard you say that before, and I wanted you to clarify a little bit more how self-love is not selfish, not self-centered, and not narcissistic at all.
Self-love is going back to your own independence. It's so easy in relationships. A lot of what I do is relationship coaching, especially for women. We tend to want to live vicariously through someone else. We're excited, right? It's new, whether you're dating or you just got married, and all of a sudden you tend to lose your identity because you just want to get to know somebody and do what they love and cater to them and help them. And all of a sudden, the longer you go through that cycle, you forget about yourself. And when you forget about yourself and you have that identity crisis of, I haven't taken care of myself for a year, 2 years, then you'll end up resenting the other person that you wanted to take care of so bad. And so when you think about self-love not being, self-centered, and obviously there's something called the ego, which, you could do things that is for yourself and forget about your partner, right? Which could be a challenge. But self-love is taking care of yourself, because if you want your significant other to make that rising leap that you desire, it's not going to happen from controlling them. It's going to happen from you becoming the best version of you. And what does that mean? That means maybe getting into the best physical shape. It could be, taking yourself out to a cup of tea or coffee. So you just breathe and you just let go of everything that's going around you. And when you come home, you're a better version of yourself versus just wanting to just throw whatever it is down your significant other's throat and then, get back to the same old. So it's being the best version of you. And if you're with somebody who doesn't love themselves, they may cling on to you and not want you to have that freedom because they don't know what it's like to be alone. And that's where most people struggle, is they have a singleness problem. And people say, what do you mean? I say the most important thing that you could ever do for yourself is be single. And so people automatically, they go to what I'm not saying, which is, what do you mean? You can't be single your whole life if, you got to get married or whatever. And that's not what I'm saying. Singleness is being happy with yourself. If you can't be happy with yourself, there's no way you could ever be happy with someone else. It's impossible. So it's identifying you being happy with yourself, by yourself, before you enter a relationship, because no one's going to save you. Could be the greatest person on planet Earth, but you're saving you at the end of the day.
Yep. I love this expression, you can't pour from an empty cup. And when we need rest and when we need recovery and we need rejuvenation after, say, like a really busy work week, then that's where self-love comes into. Maybe self-care are the behaviors of self-love. But when I take an entire Sunday and I don't text and I don't reach out to friends and family, and I simply just rejuvenate when I'm here at home doing what I need to do in order to get back on a Monday morning through Friday and just serve other people. Is that what you're talking about when it's you're not coming from a place of control, but rather you're inspiring others by becoming your best self?
Yeah, even in my own life, I have a routine that I do to pour into myself, because, self-love is not something that you ever figure out and you can just stop pouring into yourself and taking care of yourself, right? It's an everyday thing. And are you going to get it perfect every day? No, right? You're not. And that's okay, right? Are we perfect? No. And that's okay. But if you have a routine that, stems from things that are taking care of you, right? It could be reading a book, listening to music, right? Spa day. It could be gym, like whatever avenue it is that fills your own cup for yourself is so crucial when it comes to your happiness and your peace of mind. And I know you like this one. One of the things that I love to teach is 3 pillars of having a healthy body, a healthy mind, and healthy finances. And if those are met, then you're living with peace of mind. If you take away one, so let's say you have the healthy mind and body, but you don't have the healthy finances, all of a sudden your peace of mind is thrown off balance because you're living and reacting from a place of scarcity and lack, right? But if you have the finances and you have the mind, but you don't have the health, right? Without health, you can't do much, right? And if you've got the health and the finances, but not the mind, then what, right? So those three pillars is what I like to, teach and really have people understand, because, the end goal is peace of mind.
And when somebody doesn't have those three pillars in place situationally, maybe they're missing the financial piece, but they're still unwilling to be vulnerable. And the phrase that keeps coming up is like, no, I'm okay, when asked a question about where they stand and where they sit and how they're feeling. How do you work with somebody to get past that stoic mask that I can relate to a lot? For 18 years, I was just like, yeah, I'm okay. But I wasn't okay. So how do you get somebody to initially step outside and into a place of vulnerability to get past that mask?
That's actually one of my next posts, which is so interesting that you brought that up, is the I'm okay. And it reminds me of Simon Sinek's TED Talk of start with why, and how companies and people start with what and then how, and then maybe they get to the why, which is completely backwards. And it's the idea that when I ask someone, how are you? And they say, I'm okay. And I say, I don't think you heard me. And I just wait and I say, I'm going to ask you again, how are you? And sometimes I got to say it 3 times. And on the third time, and I say, how are you? I see their shoulders drop. And that's when I know it's coming. I know the truth is coming. And they say, I'm not okay. And I say, that's okay. What's going on? And when you talk about finances, someone says, well, I want a new house, right? Which is it's the exterior. Okay, so why do you want a new house? So, I could come home and it's clean and it's new and it's modern and it's fresh, but why? Why modern, fresh, new, clean? So my kids can come home to a safe place and a better neighborhood. Why? Because I don't want them to go through what I went through when I was a child. Why? Right? One step deeper. Why? Because I know the effect that had on me, not just when I was a child, but today, and overcoming my past trauma. Right? And so the more you get down to why and why and why and why, she started out with just wanting this new house, right? It's like, I'm sure you go through, right? I want to release, 100 pounds, right, of the weight on my physical body, mental, right? Why? Right? And we tend to just start out on the exterior, but it's the core. And once you get to that core, which is, what I remember Eric Thomas said years ago, he said, when your why makes you cry, then you'll be successful, right? Well, in this case, when you get to your why and your core, and it's that pain point that does make you cry, that's what's going to get you up every morning, keep you up late at night, and have you move toward, the oasis, which is, I always call the oasis, the life that you desire.
Now, one of the challenges that I see almost every day is that people want to race to the finish line, and they have that end goal in mind, which is great. We always want to come back to that purpose, that true purpose. But when was it that you learned you can't fast track this process?
Probably when I learned that I wasn't consistent, and I kept asking myself, Armon, why do you show up, for 30 days you're gaining momentum, and then like on the 31st day, you don't show up, and everyone's like, where the heck did he go? Right? Like, and it doesn't look good. You lose your following that you just took time to build. Your message just falls off the face of the earth. That's so important. I had to ask myself, why are you so inconsistent? And I got down to it when I wasn't doing and I wasn't living my purpose, right? I was living to make someone else happy, living for someone else's validation that, Armon, you're doing great, right? Armon, I come from a culture of in the Middle East. I'm half Persian. And if you don't graduate college and become a doctor or a lawyer, it doesn't matter. You could be Mark Zuckerberg starting Facebook. And if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you're still less than, because it's more about the prestige of the degree than it is about the success, no matter how else you get it. Right. And so going against that and being, what people, I guess, would call the black sheep, I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, if you, no matter what age you are, find your purpose and your why before you die, you've won in life, because it's the only reason why you're here. We all have a different DNA for a reason, right? And the challenge for most is finding out that purpose in life. Why are you here? And typically it's what you already know, but what you're, resisting because you're trying to make somebody else happy.
Yeah, and when we peel back that layer of the onion, one layer at a time, eventually we're going to cry over that purpose that we find deep down inside. And then we're going to realize that those layers of the onion were there we were using it as protection.
Yeah.
And to sum all of this conversation up, I wanted to bring it up earlier, but I'm glad I saved it till the end. But my favorite quote from Teddy Roosevelt is, comparison is the thief of joy. And when we take your life into consideration and your family's pressure to be above and beyond with a degree and a doctor or a lawyer or something with prestige, and then we reflect on the expansiveness that is social media and why we need to disconnect on a regular basis so that we're not comparing. Like you mentioned, admiration is one thing, but comparison is another. To just take away all joy in our life. Does that make sense to you? Does that resonate?
That's it. And I've been there. I mean, I remember I had like pain in my chest. I go to bed with this anxiousness, not sleeping enough, losing weight that I couldn't afford to lose because I'm skinny. And I remember all these feelings that I had because I wanted to be like someone else. I remember, I grew up in the network marketing industry, and this one guy my age, he was really successful and he talked really, really fast and loud. And I was just like, man, I want to be him. So what do? I start talking really fast, dressed like him. Then I looked at myself one day, and I'm a minimalist. So I'm wearing, at this point, and there's nothing wrong with it, let me just preface, I was wearing Louis Vuitton and Gucci, and it's just not me, right? Nothing wrong with it. Again, it's just not me. And I looked at myself and I'm like, this is not you, right? Like, he's him, he owns it, he rocks it. He's an incredible human being, but this is not you. Like, you don't talk fast, you talk slow, right? You talk from your heart, and nothing I've ever done is scripted. I've never used a PowerPoint in my life. When I speak on stage, it's just from my heart, and it comes out raw. I might mess up, I might stutter, but this is me, and you need to own it. And one of the best compliments I think you could ever get, but I got yesterday from a friend from Utah. He texted me, he said, man, we haven't spoken in a couple months, but I've been watching your videos on Instagram. And he's like, I think outside of anything you say, I just admire so much that you're just happy within yourself. And I thought about that because this is not, this is recent, a couple of years, 2-3 years, right? 2-3 years ago, I was in a toxic relationship. I wasn't happy with myself. I was comparing myself. I was living for someone else to tell me that I'm worthy. And when he's like, you're happy within yourself, I just sat there and I'm like, man, I remember the days that I wasn't. And so I just really received that compliment, because when you get to a point where you can be happy with yourself, the rest follows.
Amen to that, man. Amen. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best place for them to do that?
I'm really active on Instagram. And it's at Mr. Self-Love. It's so funny. Some people message me and they say, man, when I look at your handle, it kind of looks like Mrs. Elf Love. And I said, you know what? Mrs. Elf Love comes out in December. But it's Mr. Self-Love. I want to thank you so much, the work that you do and how you show up. And it's a true blessing that Instagram connected us. And I have no doubt I'm gonna bring Linda. We're gonna come to Colorado and spend some time.
Yeah, did I sell you on the big move, or are you just gonna come for a long weekend?
Yeah, for those who don't know and you watch this, we're thinking about moving from Los Angeles, out of state for a year or two, and maybe that turns into, for many years. But he talked about Colorado, the mountains, the snow, the weather, downtown, and I'm going to be taking that trip to seeing him and spend some time. So if you guys catch me in Colorado doing a Facebook Live with him in February, I've been sold.
I'm down. You swing by on a road trip of the Western United States and you don't stop, we're going to have words, man. So before we head out, I have to congratulate you on an upcoming adventure. You're publishing a book in 2019. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we're in the publishing process right now. The book is titled Self-Loveology. And it's a lot. The beginning is my story and what I learned. And then the tail end of it is really the how-to, right? Where do you begin if you have self-hate, if you're dysfunctional in an abusive relationship, all these things that we all, go through in life. But it's a lot of vulnerability, a lot of my story. My father's in the book, but again, I don't want to hold back my story because it's impacted my life. And now, to think that somebody's going to pick it up in the airport and somewhere and have the ability to know that it's okay not to be okay, but that your circumstance isn't your life, destination. It's not a prison sentence, is the reason why I wrote it.
Awesome. Congratulations. I'll be one of the first to grab a signed copy from you, man.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And before we jump off, is there one major impactful statement that you want to leave us with? The floor is yours.
I go back to the moment you are going to decide to choose yourself and invest in yourself will be the best investment. I went through it in my own life, from self-hate to self-love, and self-love cured my self-hate. And it truly was the beginning of my self-healing and the end of my self-destruction. So I'm going to close my eyes and tell you this from the bottom of my heart, that there is nobody you can save and nobody that can save you. And so if you want to be an example for somebody else, become the best example. If you want to love somebody else, love yourself first, because you can never love somebody else until you decide to love yourself. Know that it begins with you. Know that it ends with you, because self-love is your first love and it is your last love. It always begins and ends with us. So stop comparing yourself. Stop looking outside of yourself when you've got it all in yourself right now. It's just time to realize it.
Very well said, man. I really appreciate you digging deep there. That was awesome.
From the heart, my brother.
I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. If Armon's message resonates with you today, guys, because it's resonated with me, don't hesitate to reach out right now, because that self-love cures self-hate. That couldn't come at a better time for myself on this journey and for hopefully a number of our listeners as well. So thanks again, Armon. I'll see you when you take a trip through Denver.
I'm looking forward to it, bro. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.